you know. So pretty much, majority of the story that you'll hear about Garifuna starts with 1635. Well, I'm here to tell you that's a lie. It's a lie. That 1635 shipwreck story about the existence of Garifuna was a made-up story that was basically made up in order for them to justify stealing our homeland. So here in America, we call the colonizers, the ones who came here and colonized the Native Americans, we call them colonizers. But over there in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they were called planters. So when I talk about the colonizers in St. Vincent, I'm going to refer to them as planters, because that's what they were called then. So during the time when the planters arrived to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, of course, rich soil, volcanic soil. You know, we grew everything over there. We did not want or need for anything. So of course, when the British came over there, they saw our precious land, and what did they want? They wanted our land. You know, but unfortunate for them, it was already occupied by us. And it was occupied by us for more than, initially the Symbionese are the original people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They occupied that territory for over 7,000 years. Wow. Later on, the Caribs and the Arawaks came along and they occupied that 200 years prior to any Christopher Columbus so-called discovery of the land. And of course, later on, during the 1300s, this is where Garifuna history, oral history begins in St. Vincent, and from my ancestors that growing up, that Garifuna people started to migrate early on, prior to the settlement of Christopher Columbus or anything around 1300. And they believed this, that Africans, of course, settled and came around and traveled the world. There's evidence of that throughout the history. You know, the Olmecs and everything like that. We could go into the whole theories about how they got here. But pretty much that's where our history begins with orally, is that we came as explorers to the New World and we settled throughout St. Vincent, the Caribbean, and so what. So when of course, the planters came, first they tried to just come and take the land from us, but of course we wouldn't let them. We fought them. Garifuna people fought the planters for over 150 years. 150 years we fought them. But when you talk about Garifuna and the wars that we have with the British, they only account for 2 wars, the wars that basically happened the last 30 years. So you talk about the first Carib War, and then they talk about the second Carib War. Now, the second Carib War is where we were exiled. Basically, we fought for nearly a year, again, for our land, after the planters had petitioned, basically they petitioned a survey to send back to Europe saying that, hey, these people here, you know, they divided the Carib people with the divide and conquer. They had the original Caribs that they call red Caribs. Then they had a Carib that was a little bit of middle complexion, they will call them yellow Carib. And a Carib that looks like me was called a black Carib. So in their justification of taking the land, a black Carib and a yellow Carib was of African descent, so they were not aboriginal to that land, so they didn't have any kind of justification or claims to that land. So what did they do? You guys are escaped slaves. And if you're escaped slaves, what are you? Your property, your commodity. So you don't even exist. You're not even human. You have no right. So if you have no right, once you're claimed to be a slave, you have no right for nothing. To anything, to land, to lay claims, to say that this is your homeland, even though they found us there. They found us there, but now they're telling us, hey, you don't even exist to them. So, so that's what they did. They went ahead and they sent a report to back then, the British Empire, stating that this territory, which was the Lesser Antilles where the Garifuna people occupied, was basically not territory that was belonged to anybody. That it basically did not belong to us because we were escaped slaves. And they documented that the shipwrecks, that it was multiple that they claimed existed, but according, Europeans are so smart because they document everything. They document everything. When they would lose a ship, because all of the ships everything was accounted for, the animals, their commodity, their slaves. They had insurance for their shipwrecks, for their ships, for their slaves. So if they missed a shipwreck or whatever like that, they would get compensated for the goods on the ship. So with that being said, there's no reported evidence in any British archive of a shipwreck that happened in 1635. None whatsoever. People have researched it, and they've looked and they've looked, and there's no documentation in the Dutch archives, which they said one of the ships that shipwrecked was a Dutch ship. There's no evidence of that. Then they claimed that it was a Spanish ship that shipwrecked. There's no evidence of that. So there's basically no evidence of a 1635 shipwreck. However, there is reportedly, so according to the research of one Anthony Castillo Perez, the only recorded shipwreck which happened in South America during that time was documented in European archives on March 25th, 1789. That's a long, that's a huge difference between 1635 and 1789. So again, going back to what had happened after the last Carib War, we were defeated, believe it or not, with the help of American convoy. They had to send American troops over there to St. Vincent to help to basically steal our homeland from us. So after nearly a year and a half of war, and our last chief, Joseph Chaptier, who was defeated, who was murdered on March 14, 1797, we started to surrender, because after fighting for nearly a year, we have taken a toll. Nearly half our people were already dead, our land was stolen. And, we basically just not give up. I mean, we continue to fight to the best of our abilities to the end. But at the end of the day, the Europeans, along with the Americans, were able to, defeat us. So basically, between October 1797 and March 1797, an estimated 38,000 to 5,200. At that time, they referred to us again as Black Caribs. So I'm going to go by the historical. It would refer to Black Caribs when I'm talking about Garifuna people. So again, between October 1797 and March 1797, an estimated 4,338 to 5,200 Black Caribs were captured and imprisoned on a barren island known as Beliso. The exact number of captured, tortured, and imprisoned Garifuna varies according to the different sources. According to the records, around 2,400 Black Caribs died of rare disease, including yellow fever on Beliso. According to our oral tradition from our ancestors, is that the British Empire did not intend for us to survive. Because when Garifuna people were captured, we were charged with treason against the British Crown. And the sentence to that is, anybody know? Yeah. We were charged, again, let me repeat what our charges was, because it's documented. We were charged with treason against the British Crown. Sentence? Death. But for some reason, they felt that they could negotiate with so-called escaped slaves. And instead of, of course, killing us, they said that they would send us, to Roatan, Honduras, so they could just stop fighting with us. Because again, over 150 years of fighting with us, we weren't about to stop. So, so their best bet was to basically get us off the land. So again, we were exiled to Beliso for over a year, where half of our population who surrendered or were captured were killed, or, basically murdered. And so, again, Garifuna oral history narrates that the Garifuna people were poisoned with arsenic on Beliso and on the ships. It is said that the British did not have any intention of the Garifuna exiled people to arrive to their destination alive. Now that's deep.
Yes.
That's deep. Basically, premeditated murder. That's genocide. Because they did not expect us to survive. They wanted us dead when they captured us. They wanted us dead when they put us on Beliso. And they wanted us dead when they shipped us off to Roatán. That's just the nutshell. It's not cute. It's not pretty. I know nobody, usually people, you know, they say the cute, nice, you know, politically correct story. I don't. You know, I try. You know, I'm passionate because it's my people, it's my ancestors that it happened to, so I'm going to speak the truth. You know. So, the surviving Garifuna were transferred from Beliso to Becwa. Prisoners were embarked on 11 vessels, and the 11 vessels consisted of cannon, military supplies, transport ships, one food ship, and so forth. So we're basically part of cargo also, you know, that they shipped us off to. One of the ships landed in Jamaica to get supplies and whatnot, and this is where the history gets a little bit, not convoluted, but it gets kind of, because there's always alleged to be that there's Garifuna people in Jamaica. So what that comes from is during the time when we did make a stop off, one of the ships made a stop off in Jamaica, some of the Garifuna people escaped into the mountains, and they mingled with the Maroons. So that's where you'll hear that oh, there's Garifuna people in Jamaica. Okay, so that's where that comes from, because we did stop in Jamaica, and Garifuna people did escape, and they did, you know, form a unity with the Maroons there. Okay, so just a little clarification on that. So the Garifuna people left Becwa on March 11, 1797. That was when we were taken off our homeland en route to Roatán, Honduras. Garifuna people battled the British Empire for over 150 years. Two major wars, the First Carib War and the Second Carib War, were started in 1797 and lasted for about 2 years. And then in 1797, Garifuna people were exiled to Roatán. So this is the history in Honduras. The timeline is based on the research of Garifuna Honduran Professor Salvador Suazo. The Garifuna people arrived on April 12, 1797 to Port Royal, Roatán. Then it was an English colony. So this was the land that the British promised the Garifuna. You leave this land, St. Vincent, to us, and we're gonna put you on another land. So they put us on Roatán with basically no supplies. We basically had to fend for ourselves. Okay? Mind you, we left in February, and we arrived like a month later. You know, according to oral history, a lot of people decided not to eat because they noticed from the food that we were given, the little food that they were given, that people started to get sick. You know, so many people starved during that route. They got sick. They just didn't trust what the Europeans were doing again. You know, they were literally trying to kill us. You know, they didn't expect us to survive when we got to Roatán. So anyway, we landed in Roatán. Again, April 12, 1797. However, the Garifuna people were granted entry by the Spaniards into the mainland Trujillo. Remember, Roatán is British occupied. You know, it wasn't, back then we had British Honduras, which is now Belize, and we also had Spanish Honduras, which is now, of course, Honduras. So we landed on the English colony side, which is Roatán. And then because we didn't have anything. So we went ahead, the leaders of the Garifuna, exiled people asked the Spaniards over there, can we go to the mainland so we could get supplies or whatnot? They agreed. But with a catch. They agreed with a catch. Because of all of the stories that they've heard from the British Empire, that we were these fierce warriors, that we would, you know, kill you, we would do that, that we're just these you know, horrible people that you just don't want to deal with. You know, including we were just a whole bunch of negatives. You know how the propaganda goes. You know, so basically anything negative back then that you could throw at Garifuna people, the European British threw at us. So of course the Spanish people say, oh yes, we'll go ahead and allow you to come to the mainland, but first, you have to get christened. You have to get baptized to take that evil out of you.
Oh, shit.
Basically, is what they agreed. You could get on the mainland, but you all need to get baptized Christian to get all that witchcraft and everything. Yeah, they accused us of witchcraft and everything else. So yeah, so our leaders went ahead and they agreed to that. So upon arriving to the mainland, we were all christened, the Garifuna people, and we were given Spanish last names. So if you, yeah, so if you notice throughout Central America, you have the Creole, who will have English last names, and then you have Garifuna people who have Spanish last names. And it's not because we were owned, it's because that's the story behind it, that we had to get christened in order to seek asylum and help from the mainland. Okay? That's why my name is Noralez. Traditionally, like most indigenous people, we didn't have surnames. That wasn't part of our culture. You know, indigenous people do not have surnames. You know, you were usually named by your territory. You know, like here, you'll know the common, like Screaming Hawk or something like that. So if you were living somewhere in a region, if you were known for something, that's what your name would be. You know, it wasn't necessarily, you know, Ronnie, Cheryl, or whatever. We didn't have names like that. We had traditional indigenous names, like Figaga, which means, you know, turkey.
Turkey.
You know, like one of my mentors who was Taino, who's also a cousin of the Garifuna people from Puerto Rico. Yes, his name was Huacan, which means mighty wind. You know, so those were the type of names that we had. You know, and again, the surnames that we have now is that from being occupied, I mean not occupied, but by being christened. According to the research, the first Garifuna community in San Juan arrived around 1889. Evidence of the presence of Garifuna in San Juan, Tele, is found in an official communique on April 20th, 1891. So that's documented. And that's in Honduras. So, you know, everybody's always trying to kill Garifuna people. I talked to you about them trying to kill us in St. Vincent. It happened again in Honduras. You know, what can we say? People always want to kill us. So this part is about the San Juan Massacre that happened to us. So in San Juan, Tele Massacre happened on March 12, 1937. In front of the Community Catholic Church. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? After they forced us to get baptized, they're gonna sit up there and literally kill us in front of a Catholic church. Can you believe that? A dozen Garifuna who sympathized with the Liberal Party at that political, which we were not involved politically, but a dozen Garifuna who sympathized with the Liberal Party were executed by firing squad, again in front of the Catholic Church. Okay. How many people knew that story? No? Yeah. So that's the first, that's the first one in Honduras. That's the first massacre. There's more. And it continues today, unfortunately. Those who escaped this genocide were lucky to have sought refuge in the country of Belize, then again British Honduras. This migration would bring along the formation of a new settlement, which is named Newtown, and would later adopt to the name Hopkins. Okay? Hopkins, Belize. The Garifuna History in Belize, again based on the writings and the research of Garifuna Honduran Professor Salvador Suazo. The first sign of the Garifuna presence in Belize dates back to 1799. 1799. When Garifuna used to travel to what is called Wallace in Belize, Wallace, Belize, looking for employment as woodcutters. Okay? Now that's the reporting sighting. Now the evidence that Garifuna people were there, because people will dispute, no, Garifuna people weren't there until it's documented. So the first documented evidence of Garifuna present in Belize is found in a British document of the magistrate, which dates August 9, 1802. that they actually documented and reported this because they didn't want us there. The British didn't want us there, so they wrote a report, which reads that the admittance of the Caribs, I have to use my British accent, that the admittance of the Caribs, Garifuna, in the establishment in this business of the superintendent, due to the fact there was a considerable opposition to their admittance to the current colony, meaning they didn't want us there. And they documented that they didn't want us there. Okay, again, that was documented on August 9, 1802.
Wow.
At the beginning of 1832, there was a series of incidents that occurred with different missions in Honduras. The different allied armies, remember during that time, Honduras was not a country yet. Okay, remember that. Guatemala, Honduras, none of those places were countries yet during that time. So 3 different allied armies attacked simultaneously the government forces of Morazan. That was one army. He was the president of the Central American Federation. One was executed by the ex-president Arc in the interior of the country. Another one in Trujillo under the command of Colonel Vincent Dominguez, and the 3rd Army in Omaha under the leadership of Roman Guzman. Appropriately, with all of those 3 factions, the Garifuna basically like, we don't know who to support, so we're going to support you all. we're trying to be neutral, you know. But that didn't work out so well in our favor. Remember I told you we had several genocide in Honduras? Well, okay, it happened again. It was the second one in Honduras. It's not funny, but you know, it's part of history. Either you cry about it or you just have to put it into perspective. And I just put it in the perspective of it happened, there's nothing we could do about it. We could learn from it, you know. So the Morazan government is the one who won these battles. However, Morazan's government, who won the conflict, labeled the Garifuna participants as rebels and accused them of high treason. We remember that word, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we got accused of, you know, being rebels, high treason and whatnot. And what's the sentence for high treason?
Death.
There they go, trying to kill us again. So of course, yes, high treason was the crime that we were accused and convicted of. The leaders of the rebellions were brought in front, those Garifuna people who fought, that they knew of, basically. The leaders of the rebellion were brought in front of the firing squad, again. So, in fear for their lives, a group of Garifuna asked the British government of Honduras, again now Belize, for refuge. It was reported that around 500 Garifuna solicited the British for protection and settled 30 miles south of Belize. This is what you know, November 19th is what we celebrate because that's the mass exodus which landed Garifuna in Belize, which was then Stone Creek, which is now Dangriga, Belize. Again, that settlement was led by Alejo Beni in 1832. And now we get to Guatemala. We talked about St. Vincent. We talked about Honduras. We talked about,
Belize.
Honduras. We talked about Belize. Now we're in Guatemala. We're rolling. The oral history account and traditional Dugu songs. Dugu are the spiritual songs that we sing in temple. So according to, again, the oral history and traditional Dugu song, Livingston accounts from the locals, Marcos Sanchez Diaz arrived. Now, difference, arrived, not settled. So he arrived to what we call La Buga. He arrived to La Buga in 1802 with his family. Now, later on, we're gonna talk more about how he got over there. So he arrived, he settled there with his, well, not settled, he just arrived there in 1802. And then Marcos Sanchez Diaz finally decided to settle in Livingston in 1860. Garifuna from Guatemala are granted their citizenship during the well-known Central American Proclamation. of independence in 1821. So that's when Guatemala became independent, and along with other places became independent. And the Garifuna people were already there, so they were considered Guatemalan citizens. However, during the unsafe, remember during the same time the whole war and everything was going on back in Honduras, all of those different things were happening. However, during the unsafe and tumultuous political climate between the years of 1831 through 1832, many Garifuna fled La Buga to Belize, Stone Creek, Punta Gorda, Stone Creek again, which is now Dangriga. During 1834, there are only 2 to 3 reported Garifuna families in La Buga at that time in Guatemala. Marcos Montero, a political chief and arms commander of the port of Livingston, was sent to Belize to try to persuade the Garifuna to take ownership of their land. Remember, they left their land because they were afraid of getting killed in La Buga and Livingston. So again, during that time, Marcos Montero, he went to Belize to try to, convince them to come back to La Buga. Many Garifuna decided to go back, arriving to La Buga on September 13, 1836, under the leadership of Marcos Sanchez Diaz. In 1996, the government of Guatemala enacted National Garifuna Day as November 26. In the past, May 15, San Isidro Labraro's Day was observed as Garifuna Day. November 19 is the settlement day for Belize, and then November 26th is the Garifuna Day in Guatemala. And so we talked about St. Vincent, we talked about Honduras, we talked about Belize, we talked about Guatemala. Now we're to Nicaragua. We're all over the place. Most of the time when people talk about about Garifuna, they usually just talk about Belize and Honduras, but they don't never really talk about Guatemala. But I'm going to talk about Nicaragua. So in Nicaragua, the first appearance, not settlement, the first reported appearance of Garifuna in Nicaragua was between 1865 and 1870. They went there to seek jobs as, again, woodcutters. Okay? Now, the first reported settlement in Nicaragua in Ivo Point was in 1872. And then later on in San Vicente Square Point, between 1875 and 1878, they were founded and settled under the Garifuna people. Later on, more communities came around in La Fe in 1896 and so forth. So, if we review Garifuna present to this present day, St. Vincent, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and of course here in the United States. Now, the Garifuna people started to migrate here to the United States around 1940. I'm getting too much numbers in my head. 1940. And that was during the United Fruit Plantation, Fruit Company, that was known as Kita Banana. So a lot of, throughout the Caribbean, a lot of people worked for that company and was stationed in Guatemala. So during that time, they would, of course, go from the different ports of call and everything like that. And one of the places where they landed was in New Orleans. So a lot of Garifuna people started to settle in New Orleans and made their way, north, south, east, and west. And, they joined the military, they participated in multiple wars, Vietnam and everything like that. One of the Garifuna Parliament family's father was actually a Tuskegee Airman, who later settled in La Buga.
Guatemalan Garifuna.
So that's a little bit of American history, Garifuna history decline, and yeah, so that's basically Garifuna history in a nutshell, from, again, St. Vincent all the way throughout Central America. Yes. The Garifuna language is Arawak-based language. Also the Garifuna language is what we call VSO language, which is verb, subject, object. There's so much more to talk about Garifuna, but what I'm going to do is just allow, we'll give a few questions so I could go ahead and give Mr. Bernardes time to do his workshop. So if we have any questions.
So you mentioned Taino folks, which I'm Cuban, so Tainos. How close are Garifuna and Taino folks together?
Good question.
Good question. According to my mentor, the late Juan Massacre, Mighty Wing, he said that Garifuna people were cousins, were brothers, that we intermarried with each other. Of course, with the divide and conquer story that we're told, what was the story that you've heard about Garifuna, Tainos, Arawak, and everything? That the Caribs came, they killed the Arawaks, they killed the Tainos, and took their wife. But according to Juan Vidal, no, we lived as brothers and sisters, and we intermarried. You know, so we're closely related. If you look at the language, the native language of the Taino, many of the words are alike. If you look at the Taino dictionary, which they started to kind of
Rebuild.
rebuild the language and everything like that, many of the words are the exact same, because of course the Taino language is also an Arawak-based European language. So we have similar words. And foods, you know, of course, the cassava, you know, we call it areba, you know, we call it cassava, yuca, you know. So we eat the same thing. You know, I didn't bring the instrument, but we use the same instrument to strain out the poison out of it. Yeah, you know, so it's similar. It's very extremely similar. Yeah. So this comes from the school. We've had a physical school for over
7-8 years.
7-8 years. And during that time, with all of the lessons that we did, we produced this book. So it breaks down to the formation of the language, how the language is spoken, how to, you know, interpret the language and everything like that. And, you know, it's one of my pride as being the founder of Gahfu to be able to, you know, have this physical book to, you know, give to not just the Garifuna community, but people who are interested in learning the language. So it's available, you know, on Amazon or whatnot, and it's available here today.
November 19th is celebrated as like Settlement Day. What does that mean when, like as you said, settlement is kind of like to confuse people and to take away like ownership, not ownership, but to take away like indigenous rights to the land, like, yeah.
Specifically for that in Belize, remember the massacre that occurred?
Mm-hmm.
They actually, 500 people with Alejo Beni, they went ahead and they, you know, settled that particular town, Downbriga, on that day.
Oh.
On that day. But throughout the time, again, we reported the different numbers of when Garifuna people arrived to Belize, but there wasn't documented.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we have the indigenous land rights, okay?
Yeah.
So we have indigenous land rights in Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, and Nicaragua. These were lands that were acknowledged that was Garifuna territory. But of course, the dispute is you're not indigenous here. You're not indigenous here, you know, because how can you be? You came from here, you came from there, how can you be indigenous here? That was one of the main fights in Honduras. That they went to the World Court. I'm not specific about the date, so I'm not going to quote a date, but they went to the World Court as
Descendientes.
Yes, to argue that they were indigenous for their land, because of course in Honduras they've been taking Garifuna land for the tourism industry and whatnot, killing Garifuna, kidnapping them. To this day, it's still happening. And so they went years ago, and because they argued that they were Afro-descended, it was quickly kicked out, because it's like, how can you claim to be indigenous of, you know, Honduras when you're claiming to be that you're
African.
indigenous to Africa? So it was kicked out. But later on, probably within a 10-year span or so, they went ahead and they went back and they went as Garifuna, as indigenous to, you know, to Honduras, with the proof that we were exiled here and the Europeans, British Empire, promised us this land. And they were able to document the lands and where we settled, and which was documented, was recognized as Garifuna land prior to, you know, Honduras being formed, Guatemala, Belize, and so forth. You know, so with that, when they went as indigenous, with the proof that this territory was ours, they were able to win indigenous land rights in Honduras.
Thank you.